Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy. This is the show where we talk about AWS, FinOps, AI, cost optimization, all things AWS, and most importantly, we try to interview folks from the AWS community. My name is Stephen Barr.
Hi everyone, I'm Rahul Subramaniam, and today we have a very special guest with us, Natalia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm Natalia. I'm from AWS. I can introduce myself a little later. Yeah.
Let's see. So your title is Cloud Optimization Solutions Architects. This is right in our wheelhouse, the right thing we want to
Yes.
talk about. So how to optimize presumably cost, but not just cost functionality. Tell us about your role and how you got there.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yes, I'm the cloud optimization solution architect, and in my team, we cover well-architected framework and cloud adoption framework, and we effectively help customers on their cloud adoption journey. We help them to get to this next step of that journey, whether it's about cloud adoption, whether it's about building, whether it's about optimizing. And we use well-architected framework, best practices, and guidance to kind of to guide them. We also work with partners, and maybe some of you might have heard about the well-architected partner program. So we also enable partners on things like how they can use well-architected framework to help their customers. So yeah, there's quite a lot to that, and as you can see, so it's not just about cost; it's about all the other pillars as well, and how do you build and design applications and workloads that are balanced in all ways in terms of security, resilience, cost. So that's in short, I'd say what we do in this team. Almost my whole time that I was in AWS, which is almost 9 years now, I've been in one way or another involved with optimization. In my previous role, I was the specialist in cost optimization, the specialist technical account manager, and yeah, I've been working quite a lot with many people that you probably had on this show already. Matt Berg, Yuri Prihodko. Probably everyone knows Steph Gooch, and from all these different teams in AWS. So we are all in the same kind of technical community. So yeah, I'd say generally cost optimization or cloud optimization is pretty much everything that I've been doing in AWS, in addition to generally operational excellence, cloud operations, and helping customers in the process.
I couldn't think of a more perfect AWS speaker profile for our shows. Thank you for being here.
Oh wow, now I'm
Right.
nervous.
One curious question, Natalia. You're based out of the Ireland office and I think cater to primarily European
Yeah.
customers of AWS.
Mhm.
Are there anything unique? Is there anything unique about the customers there that you don't typically see in customers in the US?
Mm.
Or is everyone's concern the same things?
So when it comes to optimization, it's very similar. I'd say that for the majority of customers in all geos that I've been working with, or in different regions, optimization is like a sort of one of the first priorities. It kind of goes hand in hand with security. What I noticed also in Europe, generally kind of in different European countries, sustainability is also one of the top priorities that kind of goes hand in hand with cost optimization. Or maybe it's just my experience because, I've been working mostly with European customers, but with some of the, I'd say, customers in America that I worked with. So they are very fast on all the innovation, and again, trying to go hand in hand with all the new trends, while of course trying to build this kind of cost-aware cultures in their organizations. So yeah, if it makes sense. So I guess to me, probably the sustainability is a big focus, compared to a lot of other regions that I worked with.
Sounds pretty neat. So, diving right in, I think earlier on we spoke a little bit about the concept of the frugal architect. And I think we've not spoken that much about it on this show. We've spoken a bunch about the well architected framework. But,
Mhm.
a couple of years ago at reInvent, the concept of the frugal architect was talked about by Werner Vogels during the keynote. And since then, it has found its way into one of the becoming one of the pillars of the well architected frameworks. Tell us a little bit more about the frugal architect, what your experience has been with it, and how are customers kind of embracing that concept in how they actually operate day to day.
Yeah, I was very excited when I heard this term, or when I heard about this new persona, the frugal architect. Because at the first glance, on a high level, when you think about it, you think that it's probably about cost optimization, cost-aware architectures. That's true, but also there's much more to that than just cost. Well, one thing that I would say that when talking to customers and when you ask them, oh, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear cloud optimization? They always think cost. So that's why
Right.
it's not a coincidence, really. So when you say, frugal architect, people think, okay, let's talk about cost optimization. But to me, it's more about trade-offs. It's more about business value. It's about um, building smart and building efficiently. So you probably know that in Amazon we have the leadership principle, frugality, and it's
Right.
kind of funny because very often, very often when people talk about frugality, they kind of try to explain the difference between cheap and frugal.
Right.
There is actually quite a difference because when you think frugal, you probably think, oh, it has to be cheap, but it's more about doing more with less,
Mhm.
or generally achieving more with less. So when you say that somebody is frugal, it means that they just use less resources to achieve more. And for organizations, that would be, utilizing less resources, whether it's about infrastructure or it's generally about, people and processes.
Right.
You need to be, yeah.
I'm so glad that you mentioned trade-offs, because that's one of the hardest things in. I'm just channeling my former role as a consultant, right? Because people say you have to minimize costs. Okay, well, just do nothing, right?
Right.
And then it's always an option, or host it on on the free tier on a micro and just see what happens. And then the process of extracting people's there's kind of like a built-in value system that people have,
Hmm.
and you have to extract it from them. So, okay, are you willing to pay 100 times as much for 10 times the reliability for that extra 9, right? And often at the extremes, you get to those things, right? If you want 100% uptime, well, that's impossible. So then we start talking about orders of magnitude of cost versus reliability,
Yeah.
and all those things. So I'm
Yeah.
glad that you've brought that up as in terms of
Yeah.
trade off.
And I see it quite often, actually, when I have this, what we call cost optimization engagements with customers. When customer comes in and says, we need to reduce our spend, we need to reduce cost. And one of the first questions, when you start diving deep, that you would ask normally is, okay, but like, what are your priorities? Why is it exactly that you want to save money? Is it the problem with visibility? Is it the problem with you don't actually see the value in, the spend? Because it's not just about the number, but it's also about how much value that number brings you. So it's not just
Mhm.
the dollars that you spend, but it's also how much revenue you potentially make. Because exactly as you said, you can just turn everything off and not spend any
Yeah.
money. Not to, what's the value? Will it bring that value? So to me, when somebody comes in with this question, I say that, okay, so what are actually your priorities? What's more important to you, high availability, or very low cost, or things like performance versus cost? The majority of customers will say that, of course, performance will be more important for them.
Someone at AWS once phrased this very interestingly to me, and it stuck in my head. They said the job of a good solutions architect or a frugal architect at AWS is to find the path of least resistance to
Mhm.
achieving whatever your objectives are. And that is invariably the most efficient way to get there. And it makes you, or it causes you to make decisions that are frugal by
Yeah.
design when trying to achieve those objectives.
Yeah, and it is about priorities and it is about communication. Like when we talk about the
Yes.
well-architected framework as well, when we talk about, okay, how do you balance between all those different pillars? Because arguably all of them are important. So this is when we tell customers that, okay, right, let's gather the relevant people in the room and have a conversation and, discuss what are the priorities so that everyone is on the same page. And this is why I actually, like running the well architected reviews with our customers in this like special way, where we actually have the right stakeholders in the room, and then they actually talk to each other about the applications and workloads, and they learn things about those workloads that they've never heard before, and then they kind of come to this collaborative solutions to make things more efficient and just improve.
Got it. So, in a typical setup with a large enterprise, how does one even get started with? So, let's break it up into three different sections. Okay. So, let's start with an organization that's like a startup, moving really, really fast. How do they get started with assessing themselves in terms of whether they are, whether their architects are frugal architects or not? Second, when we move to a slightly larger enterprise, how does an architect assess themselves, and what are their typical first steps? And very large enterprises, so
Yeah.
how, in those three different phases, again, like crawl, walk, run, though in these sizes I think things get flipped invariably. How do you see?
When it comes to cost awareness or being frugal, I often see that the startups actually are they are more on the running path. Enterprises are more
They have
likely
to
to be
be.
on the crawling phase. But
Got it. But how do they get started? Like, what should be their standard operating procedure when they just want to get started with the idea of being frugal? If somehow top down there was this mission that said
okay,
every architect in this org has to be a frugal architect, how
okay,
do they even get started?
let's maybe start from startups, because it's
Perfect.
probably easier. So typically, and like the way how I will answer, I will divide it into several categories. So I'll tell you like how I usually see startups operate in this
Mhm.
perspective, and then maybe I'll mention like a couple of challenges that I often see, and then maybe we can discuss and find the solution how they can do better. Okay, so in startups, I see that they usually move very fast. They have a lot of requirements in terms of launching, expanding and growing. Very often, they just don't have time and resources for thinking about optimization. But at the same time, it really depends on the let's say management in the company, whether they are aware of what it means to build, let's say, the right workloads, what it means to make the right architectural trade-offs. So it's important to kind of balance between these different pillars, and also it's important to kind of make sure that they know what are the business outcomes they want to achieve from whatever technology that they are building. So if the leadership has this kind of in their mind and on their agenda, so there has to be some sort of goals. From business perspective, from leadership perspective, saying like, okay, whatever we build, it has to be efficient. It has to deliver value, and it has to be, let's say, frugal. Then it will encourage developers and engineers and generally builders. To learn and to design it in a way that will benefit everyone. I've seen that generally, especially in startups, when builders join startups, and by builders I mean could be developers, engineers, architects, and any kind of technical personas. When they join startups, they want to build new things. They want to learn. They want to kind of expand their own knowledge. So from what I've seen with a lot of startups that I worked with, they are much more open to adopting things like shift left approach that I wanted to talk about a bit later in terms of thinking of cost before you potentially deploy or before you even design. So yeah, in short, like the way how to summarize it, the way how I see it in startups is that that builders are usually more willing to learn and to move fast, but the leadership needs to encourage it. So and in terms of the challenges is, I said that they typically it often happens that they lack time and resources if they need to start implementing this kind of complex governance processes. So we might refer back to the operational excellence, and we might say that okay, it's important to have the right governance in place, but what I often see in startups is that they don't prioritize it. So I'd like to ask. So actually, what do you think? Like, is it kind of your experience as well, or is it? how would you say, in your opinion?
Yeah, I
Like,
think the challenge, if you ask any senior architect anywhere or any half decent developer, will always want to be a frugal architect
mhm,
because it's just so ingrained in most of us. I think where most technical folks get caught up is either lack of priorities that have been set around being frugal,
mhm,
or particularly when they're being measured on something else.
mhm,
Invariably, they're being measured on something else, and frugality is just expected to come for free. But because it's a trade-off environment, being frugal is almost always takes the backseat, just like
mhm.
technical debt, right? No architect will tell you technical debt is okay. Like every architect will
Yeah,
tell you
true.
technical debt is bad. I want to get done with it, but it's never a priority. It's never the number one thing that someone should do, or the number one thing that somebody's going to get praised for accomplishing. That is removal of technical debt. And so, till that becomes a priority top down in the organization and gets recognition as something important, I think most developers tend to make different trade offs that don't align with being a frugal architect. I don't know, Stephen, your experience?
I mean, I was going back to this anecdote of, any idiot can build a bridge that stands, but it takes an engineer to build a bridge that barely stands. And thinking about that in programming, right? Like, yes, you
Yes.
could throw an enormous amount of hardware and frameworks and libraries, and then that's how you get things like you get Electron apps, right, which use a gigabyte of memory and are absurd in the resource uh, consumption for what they do. Um, so I think about it in that approach, right, where you're right, good developers want to be frugal, and it's just part of that engineering discipline. And
Yeah,
yeah, you want to
efficiency.
conserve
Yeah.
those resources while at the same point knowing the trade offs, right? You're not going to
Mhm.
hand write some assembly unless you absolutely have to. Um,
Correct.
Actually, one thing I wanted to do before we get too much deeper into the technical part, why don't we go over the laws of frugal architecture real quick, just to kind of level set the rest of the conversation? Because this came out as like the seven laws of frugal architecture. Um, Actually, Natalia, should I put your screen? I think you have that.
Oh yeah, I'm just looking at this right now. Yeah.
Let's do that.
And
Let's do that all together. All right.
yeah, and as it was mentioned, so it was introduced to us like about 2 years ago at reInvent. I was quite excited about it because actually every law of the frugal architect can be in some way linked to the best practices and guidance that we have in the well architected framework, and not just the cost optimization pillar. It's not just about cost. It's also operational excellence. It's sustainability. It's resilience. It's everything. So yeah, let's see. So we have some of these laws. And uh, okay, I'll just quickly move it. So we separate them into sort of like three phases: design, measure, and observe. And generally, it kind of reflects, how you build workloads, how you build applications on the cloud. So from the initial stages, when you think about that design, then when you get to actually understanding, how your workload performs, and then how you would sort of optimize over time. Um, uh, so, Stephen or Rahul, do you want to
Well, I guess
have your opinions on this? Or
let's see. So let's talk about the first three. So cost and non-functional requirements.
Mhm.
Number two, systems that last align cost to business. And number three, architecting is a series of trade-offs. So we talked about the trade-offs, I
Yeah.
think, but then talking about the making cost a non-functional requirement. Let's dive into that one for a second. There was a really neat quote by at FinOps X. I think it was by I forget his name. I'll have it. I'll pull it up in a second. But in FinOps X, they were talking about how it used to be you'd have a requirement, and then after you locked in the requirement, you can minimize cost. But now you can think about, okay, you can actually vary the quality kind of as much as you want to by throwing more AI time at it. So what does it mean when you say make cost a non-functional requirement?
Yeah, so when we think about functional requirements, we think about like what exactly our application is supposed to do, how it kind of delivers the primary value. What is its primary value to the business? Okay, so non-functional requirements. So things like the accessibility, availability, security, compliance, and cost in particular is typically like overlooked as a non-functional requirement. And then, when we start thinking about it, it might be a bit too late. And this is when, customers come to us and say, oh, our cost is too high, but like, what do we do about it? So this is where I'm saying that, okay, when you're actually designing, when you're building, when you're thinking about the architecture of your application, you need to consider cost as well, not just what that application is supposed to be doing like functionally, but also how much it might potentially cost to maintain it, other better ways to implement it. So that's kind of I'd say my interpretation of this. I mean, to be fair, like we actually have the explanation here on screen, but any
Yeah,
thoughts
and I
on
think
this?
I think invariably some of these become trade-offs with each other as well. I think the concept of the trade-off is going to come in later on, but even the non-functional requirements are invariably a trade-off. If you want higher availability, you probably are going to have more costs. If you want higher scalability, you're probably going to have more costs. You want higher security, you're going to have more friction for the end user. Invariably, there are all of those trade offs that you're going to have to make over and over again. So it's not just that just make sure that your costs are low is a criteria or a functional requirement.
Yeah,
It should
but
be a little more deliberate in the trade offs when you're defining those non functional requirements.
yeah, but it's not just about the infrastructure, because I think when people, let's say, when they build cloud workloads, like they think about the
Mhm.
resources, the underlying resources, but it's also like the application code. And I've
Yeah,
seen examples where, um, were customers that I worked with, that's where they were basically optimizing their code. And then,
right,
it was running more efficiently. It was taking less time to run it. And, effectively it's saving money and resources as well. So
correct.
you need to think about like all of those resources, and that's about that's what it means to be frugal. So you think about all these different elements at different stages of your development and design. Um,
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Most people stop at infrastructure costs in terms of what they think as costs, but there are all other kinds of costs: cost of ownership of the code, the decay of the code, the number of human resources required to maintain and manage that, all the patches that you need to do, all the upgrades you need to do. You have to
yeah.
account for all of that when you really think about costs as part of the non-functional requirements.
Yeah, and to me, the design phase is really more about like the business. So, going back
Hmm.
to that topic we mentioned about how startups do it, right? So, and then you mentioned that, okay, probably this requirement has to go sort of from top to bottom. And yes, the leadership needs to encourage the engineering teams to think about this, this kind of business requirements, the non-functional requirements, and
Yeah,
think about trade-offs at early stages. So to me, this kind of design phase and this loss of the frugal architect, they refer more. So in my opinion, the primary stakeholder would be the leadership in the company, in the organization, or the department, depending on how big of organization we are talking about. So
agreed. And one other thing that I'm going to say is that there's just the last one on the architecting is a series of trade-offs. On that particular one, I think it's important to remember that all decisions degrade with time. So
mhm.
any trade-off that you made today with knowing what you know based on the services, based on the cost, based on every other parameter available today might change completely 6 months down the line, a year down the line, 2 years down the line. A good decision today need not necessarily remain a good decision 6 months down the line or a year down the line. So you have to constantly keep evaluating those trade-offs and change them as necessary.
I'm so glad you said that. Well, first of all, there's another law here around that optimization is incremental. Well, not just
Yes.
cost. Let's think about optimization overall. But another thing is generally within the well-architected best practices and how we talk about, utilizing the guidance, well-architected guidance to help you build, efficient and sustainable workloads. Well, I'll quickly bring it up here as well, and we can maybe share it sort of in the chat or pop it on the screen. So those trade-offs and those decisions, like exactly as you said, they will evolve over time. So when you're designing something, like you make those decisions, believing that, okay, I have the most up-to-date information right now, right? And exactly as you said, after maybe 2 or 3 years, the whole technical landscape will change. Even talking about all the AI, advancements that we've seen in the last year or so. So all of this, it's not something that, you read through this, you learn those best practices by heart, you build your application, and then you say, yes, great, I'm well architected, and I am this frugal architect because I thought about all this functional and non-functional requirements.
One and done.
Yes, it is a continuous process. So you'd have to kind of come back to it potentially maybe every 6 months, maybe once a year, and review it once again and just reevaluate. Maybe something else can be improved. Yeah.
A related question before we move on to some of the other ones: do you see fatigue in customers because a lot of customers treat all of this stuff, like the well-architected framework and things, almost like audit tasks, where you have to audit your own systems, you have to audit your own decisions, and then you have to decide how to move forward. Do you see fatigue in organizations that they're like, oh, we just finished a cycle, we barely had enough breathing room, and now we're starting another cycle of this again?
Mm-hmm. When it comes to well-architected reviews, we've heard feedback from customers for sure that it can take quite long, and it can be difficult to sort of go through the whole process and understand, are we even following all these best practices? Because there are probably more than 300 best practices across all 6 pillars. But the way how we approach it, it's not just about kind of ticking the boxes and going through each best practice. It's a conversational discovery. It's about gathering the right people in the room at the right time, and just discussing, having a discussion. Okay, what are the risks? Which best practices we follow? Can we implement some remediation? Can we implement some fixes to potentially issues that we haven't thought about before? So it's, I think it's more about kind of the approach, the mindset that with which you're going. It's about the mindset that you have, like when you're approaching this process. Some customers, they unfortunately think of it as an audit, but that's not how we want them to think about it. We want them to think about it as a collaborative exercise, as an opportunity to sit and have this conversational discovery about their workload, and then find opportunities to improve. So that's how ideally we would like customers to think about this process. And again, what I often also see is that, talking about well-architected reviews in particular, it's not always that they go through all of the pillars, because as I mentioned about trade-offs and business priorities, it's possible that right now there are particular priorities in the organization and they want to only look at the security and reliability part. So, they gather the right people in the room, the right stakeholders, and they talk about those best practices and they, again, find opportunities to improve. There are, of course, ways to help and speed up this process. Maybe I'll talk about it a little later. I have one example solution that maybe I could share, but maybe let's go back and finish with the Frugal Architect first and see how it all connects together.
Well, it looks like, looking at the rest of the list, so we've talked about observation, cost-aware architectures.
Mm-hmm.
We did talk about the incremental nature of it, right? You're not going to get it right on the exact first go, right? Because your architecture is going to change. The different pieces of your architecture will become more or less important. Unchallenged success leads to assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting one. This is it sounds very deep, and I want to make sure I'm not overthinking it or underthinking it. It seems like something you get in a fortune cookie.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
Right. So, okay, I'll close the hint here a little bit on the screen. So, what often happens, and I actually see that during well-architected reviews as well, what often happens is that I hear quite a lot that this phrase that, okay, it works well, it's always been working like that, it never breaks, why should I change anything? Why should I try to improve it in any way? And actually, when I pop it up on the screen here under this law of the frugal architect, right, the unchallenged success leads to assumptions. There's this interesting phrase here that it's one of the most dangerous phrases in the English language. We've always done it this way. And this is about like status quo. So when things work, when nothing fails, let's say you build something, it works like that for like 10 years on that one T2 micro instance. It doesn't mean that this is still good and it should be like that, the whole time. I find it sometimes challenging when I talk to customers and when we are trying to challenge some of these technical decisions that they made in the past. And, I get it. I understand that it might be difficult because let's say some of those decisions were made for a reason, and some people might just look uncomfortable. They might be like, okay, right, that was my decision, I don't want to kind of look bad that maybe I made a wrong decision. But that's not what we are trying to do here. Again, we are trying to collaborate, we are trying to open this discussion to find improvement opportunities. It's not about kind of blaming somebody that somebody made like a decision that wasn't ideal in the past. But that's what it's about. Any decisions that we make, whether it's technical or whether it's, especially when we are building something, if those decisions are going like unchallenged for a long period of time, then at some point things might fail, and it will be much worse, when it happens than when we think about it proactively. Does it make sense? Like when we look
Oh,
at
well, I like what you said about we've always done it that way, and I was thinking back to when I was a teenager, I had a tech consulting, just helping little businesses out with things. I remember I was at this factory, and I was talking to, I think it was the receptionist, and she was showing how she backed up her contacts onto a floppy disk every day. And I watched her do the process, and she kind of always hit escape on this one pop up. And I was like, wait a minute, why are you doing that? And we dug into it, and it turns out that escape on the pop up was actually canceling the writing of the backup to the floppy drive.
oh.
And so we looked at this beautiful bookshelf of perfectly labeled, color coded, archived floppy disks, all of which were blank. And it was like this. Her face was just all the color drained out, and just realized, okay, we've always done it this way. It's an assumption that the backups are good. It's never been challenged. Luckily, they never needed to check if their backups worked, but we quickly, had to reverse this process or change the process to not click out of that little dialogue that was actually saying, "Hey, this isn't going to work." So I can definitely appreciate this perspective.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites, I'd say, because again, even though we talk about frugality, we talk about cost aware culture, but this is so broad that it can be applicable to almost anything, right?
Correct. I think, like I said, every decision degrades over time and has to be
Yeah.
revisited. It has to be reanalyzed, because if you don't, then it will crumble at some point.
Yeah, and I think if I talked about my favorite one, it's probably actually the unobserved systems leads to unknown costs. And I know we didn't really deep dive on that, but really, you cannot optimize or what you cannot see,
Measure.
or you cannot optimize what you cannot measure. Yeah, and this
Yeah.
is it really leads from the design phase. When the management, the leadership knows, what is it that they are trying to achieve, what are kind of the business outcomes that they expect, before making any decisions about the technology that they choose to, the technology choices. Then, when it comes to cost, this is where, they need to consider implementing this kind of cost observability quite early in their, I guess, design, plan, architect, and build stages. Yeah. So that's Frugal Architect, and really all of these laws they really relate quite well to the well architected framework. And as I mentioned before, it's not just about cost optimization pillar; it's all the other pillars too, and it's about trade-offs. So that's why, as I said, like I was very excited when this was presented in this format 2 years ago at reInvent.
I completely agree. Go ahead, Stu.
Let's take a 1 minute break, and when we come back, let's dive into the topic of shifting left. Let's take a 1 minute break, and we'll dive into the idea of shifting left, and also when we say shifting left, why cost can't be an afterthought anymore when we're building, or should it be an afterthought? So when we get back after the break, we'll dive into that.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix fixers are AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost savings opportunities and doesn't just find them. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part is that it works non-stop. See for yourself. Click on the button to get a free demonstration of CloudFix and stop overspending on AWS today.
All right, we're back from the break and wanted to talk about, before we jump into the shift left conversation, we wanted to have an example of a customer of processing the Frugal Architect framework, the well-architected framework, and how it added value to their experience and kind of centered their thinking. So if you could talk us through that.
First of all, I have to mention that customers rarely come to us and say, like, I want to be a frugal architect. How do I do this? That's not how they phrase this question, right? That's not how they approach it.
Right.
Generally, frugality is a very kind of specific term that, like, we use it quite often in Amazon, in AWS. But the way how customers usually come to us, and like I have one example, they usually approach it from cost perspective. Again, as we mentioned before, when you say frugality, when you say optimization, you immediately think of cost first. So I recently had like an example. So a customer came in with a question, how they can save money. They said they need some cost optimization. They didn't know how to approach it. But before jumping into providing some recommendations immediately, saying like, you can do right sizing savings plans and like reducing waste, it was important to understand what was the real concern and like why they thought that they were spending a lot. Did they have the right visibility tools and things like that? So when I was, asking additional questions, I realized so this customer was working like also through the partner. So there was like a partner doing some of the operations for them, and what it turned out was that the customer didn't have like a lot of the visibility to that operations, of the partner, and there was certain kind of uncertainty or ambiguity. Like they didn't know whether the partner is following best practices. So I suggested that one way to potentially, help you understand like where you stand in terms of are you even operating efficiently? Is your workload efficient or running efficiently? Let's do a well-architected review. So when we've done that with a customer and with a partner, we look through different, pillars. This gave this customer like a peace of mind and understanding of like the full picture of that like operational processes, also making sure we knew that the partner is following the best practices and they are being efficient. And of course we had some action items out of that whole conversation, and there were certain things that could be improved from security perspective. Yes, maybe some of the cost optimization things, but I'd say on a high level overall, while they came in with this question, about, okay, we want to be cost efficient, we want to save money. What they really wanted, they wanted to have the visibility and understanding that they operate efficiently, that they run efficiently, that that they everything that they do, that it kind of aligns with their priorities. So that's how effectively the well-architected framework workshop that we did, that it helped them get to the point where they really needed to be.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's just getting that centering and frame of reference, right? And I like how you just said you distill down to what they really wanted to know, right? Because people that come in with that question, just like you don't come into the be a weird example, but like when you go to the doctor, you're not saying what you need, you're saying what hurts.
Yeah.
It's their job to figure out, how to change that from what hurts into what you need.
Yeah, customers usually come in with saying that like what they need, but it's up to us to figure out what actually hurts. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. So why don't we jump next into the conversation about shift left? And like I said, a lot of decisions in my head keep deteriorating or degrading or need a revisit. So, and we've talked about shift left so much on this show, but given 2025 and this time in 2025, with all the stuff that's happening, how do you handle the conversation with customers on shift left today?
Sometimes customers ask, okay, how can we automate? How can we make it faster, quicker, easier? And it can be related to anything, whether it's security or cost or just generally operational processes. That's how it usually comes up in the conversation. So
Got it.
customers just want to be more efficient. They want to move fast. They want to launch fast. They want to automate. So that's where sometimes this conversation about like shifting left is brought up. I think traditionally it's more about security, like when we say that like we kind of shift security left, right? But recently we started talking more about cost-aware culture as well, and kind of shifting left when it comes to cost and designing with cost in mind. So customers are much more aware now of things like FinOps best practices, and generally that you probably need to think about cost a bit earlier than traditionally organizations have been doing it in the past.
Got it.
Because I guess sometimes there's this tension, right? Where if you say if you shifted everything left, obviously you will get to the point where you're exactly where you started.
Oh.
You can't shift everything left. Now, obviously, security is first, right? Especially if you're dealing with customer data, financial data, all of that come first. But then with FinOps, I think we're less locked into our architecture choices than we ever have been, right? So I was thinking, if I coded something up to use, I don't know, say EBS and reading flat files from EBS, and later I wanted to point Q at it and say, change this to use Dynamo and serverless. I have pretty good faith that wouldn't be that hard. So given that, how would you respond to, okay, I just want to make a mess, do it the way I know how, and I'll just tell Q to clean it up and make it cheaper later?
So you're saying whether we should shift left and like think about it in advance proactively, or whether we should worry about it later. Yeah. So because arguably now with all the tools that you have, especially around automation and AI, you can do it easy, like post factum, right?
Yeah. So why would I want to?
Yeah.
I guess what are some of the situations where you've seen people maybe architect themselves into a corner that is difficult to extract themselves from?
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say it depends on like what you're building, right? So let's think of some examples. So there are certain techniques. Okay, let's talk about cost, cost optimization and techniques and how can we optimize. So there are certain things that you can fix relatively easily, later. Like you had an example about EBS and potentially like changing volume types, things like that. Even right-sizing instances, even though, again, arguably it's like you need to be sure that the new instance type and family will suit your workload. So you need to do some testing. So the thing about the decision about selecting resources and resource types and services that you use to build whatever you're building. So this is to me this is kind of the shift left approach, like, because what I see very often, especially in migration scenarios, probably in the majority of the cases, organizations will just do kind of lift and shift, and then they worry about optimization later. And this is where then it's very difficult to optimize, because people don't know what are the dependencies. They are not sure whether something will change, like with where their data resides. For example, when we think about like data, let's say in particular, is it easy to move data from like one source to another? Does it make sense? Is it even like the right services? Is it like the right use case? So yeah, I'd say this, when selecting services like resources, kind of the right sizing exercise, ideally we would like customers to think about it in advance, because it's much easier to do this kind of exercise earlier at the design stages, rather than doing lift and shift, especially in migration scenarios, and then trying to optimize later, and then it will just take much longer. You will spend like a lot of time and resources. It's not that easy to re-architect. Let's put it that way. So that's one
I
example.
like how you, especially about what you said, the data moving, right? Because even if you don't think about it beforehand, and all of a sudden you have data in one place, like moving data, especially a large amount of it, can be expensive, even if it's just a one-off.
Yeah. So that's one example, but generally, the best practice is really to use infrastructure as a code when you deploy. So when you think about building fresh and going kind of cloud native, that's definitely something that you just need to adopt. That your teams need to adopt, because then, if you do it right, then you can think about implementing some of this kind of controls and governance within that infrastructure as a code, within your templates. You wouldn't have, again, you can come back and fix it later, but it's just more efficient, more streamlined, and it's kind of faster and easier, and it's like more smarter use of resources when you start thinking about like, okay, what would be the cost impact? How can we do it better, and how can we do it right at the beginning?
As I've been listening to the two of you, I've been kind of playing devil's advocate in my own head over and over again. So here's a little bit of a dump, which is completely disorganized because amazing points made by both of you. On one hand, I feel like if you're a large enterprise and you've started to adopt AI in your development, the friction to optimize something very quickly using the AI tools has now made it almost a no-brainer to optimize now. Like, why would you want to wait for later to get optimal in terms of your costs or your alignment with whatever objectives you have, which have changed since you started? But now, if you want to get efficient towards your objectives, whatever they may be, cost, non-cost, whatever parameters you're choosing as your objectives, you can now use AI to kind of get there quickly now. So the shift left is almost, as I think about it, baked in and aligned with your use of AI. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where you have a lot of developers vibe coding these days and building up apps and shipping them in a matter of hours or days rather than weeks and months as it used to be earlier. And when they vibe code their way, it becomes more imperative, if it's not already, I believe it's already happening, but it becomes even more imperative that we pay attention to the fact that these AI agents and models are capable of actually producing efficient solutions from the get-go. So with QCLI, for example, it's amazing that you first start with the PRD. You start with the entire product definition. When you do that, you're actually stating what your objectives are. And ideally, all the code that's generated by QCLI actually is efficient from the get-go towards those objectives. Right? So you never have to worry about these things. The friction towards getting more efficient has reduced drastically with the use of AI tools in day-to-day development.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see, how it evolves over time, and like what we are currently discussing, also even like in my team as well. Generally, like what the future of well architected will look like, what the future of well architected reviews will look like. How can we incorporate all of this kind of tools? We still believe that. This whole element of this conversational discovery and getting people to talk to each other is still important. You cannot really remove that, because when we build great products, we like people build great products. I'm still not there yet. I don't believe that we should trust AI to build our great products. We need to trust people and the creativity of our builders, but they should be using the tools to help them to be more efficient and do it better. But anyway, that's a conversation for a different story. It's a bit philosophical, I'd say. But yeah, I definitely can tell that like we are discussing this now. How we believe. Well, we're talking to customers and partners, and discussing, okay, how can we use the power of AI and automation to be efficient, but also not lose this kind of creativity and innovation that comes from our builders and from our people who build these great products. So yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I think we're heading towards the end of the interview. I wanted to talk about one other thing you had mentioned earlier about infrastructure as code.
Mhm.
You said that there was an IAC analyzer.
Oh
I
yeah.
was wondering if we could talk about that.
Yeah, so I was wondering whether at some point in the conversation I would briefly talk about it or not, because we talked about like shift left, we talked about kind of cost aware culture, we talked about all these different trade-offs, general well architect reviews, and yeah, I wanted to show just very briefly, the solution that my team worked on, and back to the question on the fact that some customers say that they might be a bit like fatigued from the process, as this kind of reviews looking at all of these best practices can take a very long time. So we're trying to like simplify it, and this solution that I'm talking about is the ISC analyzer, or like well architected infrastructure as a code
Right.
analyzer. I don't know if we can bring it up quickly, maybe my screen, because I'm just looking at it now. So it's on
Yes.
AWS samples. And well, effectively, it's like a CloudFormation template that you can deploy on your account. And this is
Right.
just a kind of rough backend, right? it's using Bedrock. It's using also the knowledge base that comes from like the actual well-architected best practices. So if, let's say, we would be updating any of the guidance, whether the well-architected itself or any of the lenses, so it checks, that guidance kind of real time. And yeah, you deploy the solution and then you link it to the well-architected tool within the account. And then you feed the a template either from CloudFormation or from Terraform or even the whole Terraform project into it. Or you can also feed some kind of architecture diagrams and generally like documents with the description of your workload of the architecture, and it will analyze all this. It will kind of compare it to the best practices, and it will like link it to the well-architected tool where it will create like a workload, and it will just help simplify the process of the actual review. So like this is an example here of like a kind of screenshot. So it reviewed like 307 best practices, right, across like all of the 6 pillars. And then it kind of ticks some of these boxes where it says, okay, right, this best practice is applied. So based on that analysis from the document that you feed into it or the template, so at least partially to a certain extent, it can help you speed up the process. So like in this example here, it shows, okay, 71 best practices are applied. Some of the best practices are not applied and some are not relevant. Well, currently not relevant, it means it could be something from the operational excellence pillar that like there's just not enough information either in the template or in the documentation that was like feed into it. So, at least, now from 307 best practices that you'd have to review during the architecture review process, you're
Right.
down to 100, and this is where you gather your team, you talk about it, and you discuss, you have this kind of collaborative discussion, and you can kind of fill in any gaps that automation was not able to kind of find. And there's, of course, like an AI assistant that can help you.
Right.
You can ask it
course.
questions. So yeah, I just wanted to like briefly share, because we mentioned all of these different like processes, the reviews, the best practices, and we talked about shift left, and we talked about the importance of automation and AI in the process, how it can help make our life easier. So I thought maybe I'll share, and we have some of our partners, the well-architected partners, using it and running reviews with their customers. And from what we've heard from the feedback, that it reduces the amount of time it takes to complete the review, at least like, what's it, like the X2, like the double,
Yeah,
no,
the 2x.
2X. So
Or it reduces by half.
50%, yeah, it reduces by half the amount of time it takes to do this, which effectively reduces the cost of resources. Like, for example, resources of the consultant or architect or developer or engineer who has to sit through the review.
Right.
So, like, coming back to the cost question, so it's not just the cost of infrastructure, but, whatever you use to help you be more efficient, like it just helps you save money, whether it's on resources or on infrastructure or general
just
operations.
productivity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
fantastic. This has been very, very enlightening, and I have churned through thoughts in my head multiple times, much more than any other interview or the conversation. I started at one end of the spectrum thinking about shift left, landed at a completely different place by the end of this interview. But thank you so much for all your perspectives.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah,
this has been really, really fun.
It was very interesting to me as well. Yes, and I hope that maybe we'll meet again to talk about something else another time.
We will definitely make that happen. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Natalia.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry, because CloudFix uses AWS recommended savings techniques. It fixes, not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the link to start saving now.